Hello guys, welcome back to our anime moment. Guys, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. Today is explanation of Martial Universe Season 7 Part 8 based on novel. So let's start. Lin Dong slowly walked into the stone tower gently. After experiencing a momentary darkness, his vision brightened up abruptly. An endlessly vast stone hall appeared in Lin Dong's line of sight. The hall was pervaded with a vicissitude aura. Gentle lights were flickering like hovering spirits in the surroundings. The stone hall was extremely unique and it did not contain any bookshelves. Instead, it was filled with stone tablets that were of different sizes. Each stone tablet was encircled by a faint glow. Lin Dong stood at the main door and looked at the seemingly endless number of martial art stone tablets. Soon after, he could not help but suck in a breath of air. This is the strength of a super sect. The number of martial arts here was truly terrifying. In the stone hall, one could see a few figures who were standing firmly while staring at the stone tablets ahead of them with an extremely focused expression. There were also some people who were seated cross-legged on the floor with their eyes fixated on the stone tablets. These people seemed to be engrossed in the world of martial arts. Lin Dong strode forward lightly. He slowed down his pace and silently walked through the hall that was filled with martial art stone tablets. At the same time, his gaze was constantly sweeping through those stone tablets. Those tablets depicted a dazzling lineup of martial arts. High-grade manifestation martial art, raging bull power skill. High-grade manifestation martial art, swimming dragon step. Low-grade manifestation martial art, water dragon blade technique. Lin Dong began to get dizzy after sweeping through the stone tablets. The multitude of martial arts blurred his vision. Clearly, the number of martial arts that this hall contained had reached a terrifying number. If any one of these martial arts was to be placed in the Great Yang Empire, it would surely cause a carnage. However, in this place, these martial arts were placed everywhere for the disciples to study. How long will it take to find the one? As Lin Dong's eyes swept across the multitude of stone tablets, he shook his head helplessly. If he was to check these stone tablets one by one, he would not finish the process even if he took days and nights. Let's check out the desolate stone first. Lin Dong raised his head and looked into the depths of the hall. Soon after, he quickened his pace and walked past the stone tablets one by one. After approximately 10 minutes, he suddenly stopped. He was slightly astonished as he looked at the direction ahead of him. A few hundred feet ahead, there was an enormous platform. A gigantic grey stone, which was roughly a few hundred feet tall, silently stood tall and upright in the middle of the platform. The huge stone was sphere-shaped and its entire body was dark grey in color. It seemed to be covered with moss as well. Indistinctly, one could see a few fine cracks on its body. An indescribable energy wave was constantly emitting from the huge stone. While Lin Dong was standing at a distance away from it, the energy wave came and collided with him. At that moment, his body shivered and even his mind was slightly dazzled by it. Lin Dong felt as if he was being placed in an ancient desolate land, where heaven and earth was filled with a bleak emptiness. A feeling of desolation pervaded his mind. Even the yuan power in his body felt the corrosive effect of the desolation, channeling through his body slower and slower. Huff. Lin Dong heaved a breath of air. A solemn look swept across his eyes. That energy wave must be the desolate force that Wu Dao was talking about. However, the desolate force that was emitted from this huge stone was countless times stronger than Tong Chuan's. So this is the desolate stone. Lin Dong muttered to himself. Then, he shifted his gaze to the platform surroundings. Around the desolate stone, there were numerous disciples meditating silently. Traces of desolate force released by the desolate stone were being absorbed by these disciples. Lin Dong heaved a sigh and stepped forward. Some of the disciples around the desolate stone heard his footsteps and turned over. A surprised look flashed across their eyes. Apparently, they recognized Lin Dong. However, Lin Dong ignored their stares and continued walking up the platform. Then, he stopped before a grey-colored stone tablet. On the stone tablet, there were some ancient characters. Desolate force. The two ancient words appeared before Lin Dong's eyes, making the corners of his eyes twitched. Then, he shifted his gaze downward and continued reading the rest of the words on the stone tablet. As Lin Dong's gaze shifted downward, an astonished look gradually formed on his face. That was because he discovered that the so-called desolate force was not a kind of pure energy. In fact, it was a kind of technique. This had completely deviated from his expectations. The description on the stone tablet recorded the technique to practicing the desolate force. And at the end of the description, Lin Dong saw the real name of this skill, the desolation skill. The so-called desolate force should be a type of energy that one obtains after practicing this skill. A thought came into Lin Dong's mind. He could feel the potency of the desolation skill. Furthermore, the desolate force that one could obtain by practicing this skill was rather powerful as well. In his previous fight with Tong Chuan, if not for the fact that he possessed the devouring ancestral symbol, he would definitely be put in a sorry state by the corrosive power-filled desolate force. The stone tablet recorded down the detailed technique to practicing the desolation skill. According to the description, the desolation skill was divided into 10 levels. It was a skill that must be practiced by the direct disciples of the Desolate Hall. The technique to practicing this skill was rather unique. One had to start off by absorbing the desolate force from the desolate stone first. From there, he or she had to form the desolate force in his or her body and use yuan power to nurture this seedling. As the seedling grew, the desolate force that he or she possessed would become increasingly stronger. In other words, if one wished to practice this skill, he or she would have to rely on the desolate stone. Otherwise, even if one knew the technique to practicing this skill, he or she would not be able to actually practice it successfully. There's indeed something unique about it. Lin Dong's eyes flickered. Once again, he tried to comprehend all the information written on the stone tablet. Then, he raised his head and looked at the colossal desolate stone ahead of him. Looking at the desolate stone from afar, one could sense the ancientness of it. The numerous marks on the surface of the stone were caused by the aging process. Clearly, this artifact must have existed for a long time. A few hundred feet away from the desolate stone, there were several stone platforms that only had enough space for one person to sit. These stone platforms were filled with Desolate Hall's disciples, who were absorbing traces of desolate force that were emitted by the desolate stone. The desolate force seems to possess an extremely powerful corrosive power, Lin Dong discovered as he got closer to the desolate stone. The desolate force that was spiraling around that area was exceptionally strong, and the surrounding disciples did not dare to get close to it. They were seated a few hundred feet away and were absorbing the desolate force that was flowing out from the desolate stone. This scene put Lin Dong into a deep thought. He looked at the ground around the desolate stone. From what he had seen, the ground was dried up and cracking, giving the impression of a barren land. "I see," Lin Dong muttered to himself softly. Following which, a faint smile appeared on his face. The technique of practicing the desolation skill began to run through his mind once again. After a slight hesitation, he took a forceful step forward and walked toward the desolate stone. Lin Dong quickly leapt over the disciples. Then, he continued walking ahead without stopping. His action quickly led to an outbreak of commotion in the quiet surroundings. Numerous disciples that were meditating widened their eyes in astonishment and looked at Lin Dong. "Lin Dong, do not get too close to the desolate stone. Otherwise, you will be corroded by the desolate force till your life force is totally depleted." One of the disciples could not help but shout at Lin Dong. "Thanks for the reminder." Lin Dong turned his head and smiled at that disciple. However, he did not stop in his tracks. Even though the desolate force was powerful, his body possessed something that was far more powerful and terrifying. At this moment, the surrounding disciples widened their eyes and pursed their lips tightly while looking at Lin Dong, who was walking towards the desolate stone. The fists in their sleeves were tightly clenched. They clearly knew how deadly was the desolate force around the desolate stone. Thud thud. The sound of Lin Dong's footstep was the only sound that could be heard on the entire platform. Everyone's heartbeats were beating to the pace of Lin Dong's footsteps, getting increasingly faster. As silence swept across the platform, a grey-cloaked blind old man walked out from behind a stone tablet that was not far away. He raised his head while his pupil-less, ash-colored eyes were fixated on Lin Dong. Following which, a slightly surprised look appeared on his wrinkle-filled, aged face. Subtle sound of footsteps resounded quietly throughout the platform. A skinny figure was walking on the platform. Under numerous shocking gazes, the figure walked with an unhurried pace, getting closer to the gigantic desolate stone in the middle of the platform. This fellow. At this moment, a lot of disciples furrowed their eyebrows. Among these disciples, there were some who tried to get closer to the desolate stone. After all, the closer one got to the desolate stone, the more desolate force one could absorb, and this was highly beneficial to their cultivation of the desolation skill. However, the person who was able to do it had yet to appear. Even the 4 current senior direct disciples could only make it to 50 feet within the desolate stone at best. If they were to get any closer, their bodies would be corroded by the overbearing desolate force, drying up in the process. How could Lin Dong achieve such a feat when even the 4 senior direct disciples were unable to do so? However, even though there were a lot of people doubting Lin Dong's reckless move, they did not try to dissuade him from doing so. After Lin Dong's exceptional result in the Pill River, nobody in Desolate Hall dared to treat him as an ordinary disciple. Under the numerous attentive gazes from the onlookers, Lin Dong's figure moved increasingly closer to the desolate stone. Buzz buzz. As Lin Dong moved closer to the stone, he could feel the terrifying energy wave that was coming at him head-on. The desolate force around this area was up to 10 times stronger than where it was a few hundred feet away. The desolate force that pervaded the air pierced through Lin Dong's body from all directions. Under such corrosion, the color of Lin Dong's robe started to fade. Eventually, his robe started to show signs of drying up, appearing like a piece of barren land. The desolate force is rather overbearing. Lin Dong reached out his palms. At this moment, the skin of his palms had become rather dry and dull. A surprised look swept across his face. It seemed like the so-called desolate force was able to enervate anything, including the yuan power in his body. If he was any other ordinary individual that encountered such overbearing desolate force, it would pose an intractable problem. However, for Lin Dong, it did not seem too much of a bother. Devour. A gentle voice rang across Lin Dong's mind. Following which, traces of devouring power started to extend outward from his body silently. TCCH. The devouring power quickly twined around the traces of desolate force that had invaded Lin Dong's body. Without the slightest bit of hesitation, those traces of desolate force were being devoured at once. While the devouring was taking place, a fine sound could be heard from Lin Dong's body. It sounded like someone was crunching a bunch of dried leaves. At this point in time, Lin Dong's shriveled palms were recovering slowly. The desolate force that invaded his body had been completely finished off by the devouring power. As Lin Dong felt what was going on in his body, a smile appeared upon his face. Under the numerous startled looks from the onlookers, Lin Dong cracked his neck gently and quickened his pace. He's actually all right. How can it be? The desolate force has no effect on him. When everyone saw Lin Dong moving as though he was flying, commotions broke out in the surroundings. Everyone was flabbergasted at this scene. They could not believe that Lin Dong was actually able to withstand the boundless and dreadful desolate force. Under the platform, in front of the stone tablet, the blind old man stared silently in the direction of Lin Dong with his pupil-less eyes. His face did not show any emotions. However, his wizened hands that were holding the broom tightly clenched unconsciously. Buzz buzz. With his quickened pace, Lin Dong rushed into 10 feet within the desolate stone in less than 10 seconds. The desolate force in this area had reached a rather terrifying level. Even the ground began to dry up and crack at this moment. When Lin Dong's feet stepped onto the ground sunk and revealed a heap of ash. After Lin Dong entered 10 feet within the desolate stone, he finally felt an immense pressure. If not for the fact that the devouring power was channeling through his body, his life force would have been corroded by the desolate force to the point that he died. Once again, Lin Dong recalled the technique to practicing the desolation skill in his mind and took in a deep breath of air. Then, a series of profound and cryptic chant flowed through his mind. TCCH. As the chant flowed through his mind, the unique yet vigorous desolate force rapidly entered Lin Dong's body as if it was being attracted by something. When the desolate force entered Lin Dong's body, it did not have a single chance to create chaos. Instead, it was manipulated by the domineering devouring power and forcefully directed towards Lin Dong's dantian. If he was an ordinary individual that was practicing the desolation skill, no matter how strong his physical body was, he would still need some time to adapt before allowing traces of desolate force to be absorbed into his body and form the desolate seedling. Clearly, Lin Dong was able to skip these insignificant steps. The desolate force might be domineering, but the devouring power was far more domineering and powerful. With the suppression from his devouring power, the desolate force was not able to pose any threat. Along with the series of cryptic chant in Lin Dong's mind, the grey-colored desolate force flowed steadily into his body. In Lin Dong's dantian, a stream of grey-colored air began to form. However, it had yet to reach the level of forming a desolate seed. Too slow. Lin Dong furrowed his eyebrows and said something that would cause those disciples to spurt out blood if they were to hear it. The first time they practiced the desolation skill, it took them 1 or 2 days to successfully form a trace of desolate force in their bodies. However, Lin Dong was still not satisfied with the absurd speed that he was going at right now. Of course, Lin Dong did not care about what other people think. All he wanted was to become stronger, so much so that the next time he met Ling Qingshu, he did not have to hang his head low anymore. As such, he would not give up on any opportunities to become stronger. Therefore, when Lin Dong finished his sentence, he continued walking forward despite receiving numerous horrified gazes from the desolate hall's disciples. Hiss! As Lin Dong continued walking forward, the disciples surrounding the platform took in a deep breath of cold air. Could it be that this fellow wanted to hug the desolate stone and practice the skill? He surely knew that, within 10 feet of the desolate stone, every step he took would increase the strength of the desolate force by up 10 times, right? At this point of time, the broom in the blind old man's hands began to tremble slightly. A glint seemed to flash across his ash-grey eyes. Under numerous attentive gazes, Lin Dong walked forward step by step. He could feel the rising pressure in his surroundings. Soon after, a faint green glow encircled his body. 1 step, 2 steps, 5 steps, 9 steps. Thud! When Lin Dong took the final step forward, everyone's eyes were wide open. Their eyes were filled with disbelief. Under those incredulous gazes, Lin Dong raised his arm slowly and tapped his finger on the desolate stone. As Lin Dong's slender finger fell on the desolate stone, a coarse feeling that was accompanied by a chilliness extended through his finger. Following which, an indescribable yet terrorizing energy wave gushed out from the desolate stone like a volcanic eruption. Eventually, the energy surged into Lin Dong's body mercilessly. Bang! At this moment, Lin Dong's body trembled fiercely. Even his bones gave off cracking sounds. A dark grey color extended through his finger all the way up to his arm with an astonishing speed. Snap! Crack! The dark grey color moved extremely fast. Within seconds, it had extended throughout Lin Dong's body. Even his face started to show signs of shriveling up, appearing like a stone statue that was smashed in the face. When the surrounding disciples saw this scene, their facial expression changed drastically. This fellow finally tasted the consequences of being reckless. Did he really think that anyone could endure the desolate force that was contained in the desolate stone? He can't endure it, huh? In front of the stone tablet, the already wrinkle-filled face of the blind old man shriveled up even more. His hands were holding the broom tightly. After a moment, he finally shook his head and took a step forward, preparing to make a move. Elder, this disciple can still handle it. Just when the blind old man took a step forward, a soft voice that was sent through a trace of mental energy echoed into his ears silently. The blind old man was startled before he gradually retracted his footstep. With his ash-grey eyes, he looked at the distant figure that was touching the desolate stone. A confused look appeared on his wizened face. A seemingly boundless grey energy violently swelled within Lin Dong's bodies akin to tidewaters. The places that it visited, even including the meridian, showed signs of withering. The corrosive power of the desolate force was obviously extremely terrifying. Lin Dong clearly realized this fact as his gaze immediately grew more and more solemn. Although it must be said that he was not afraid of the overbearing desolate force since he could rely on the devouring ancestral symbol within his body as a seal, it is never a bad idea to be a little extra cautious. Kai? At this moment, with a thought of his mind, wisps of green light started to scatter from within Lin Dong's body. Under the envelopment of this green light, those meridians which were showing signs of withering due to the corrosion by the desolate force, started to regenerate rapidly. Having practiced the green heaven materialized dragon skill, Lin Dong's muscles and skin were not only resilient, even his organs and viscera also possessed the same formidable defensive power. Devour all of them. Lin Dong revolved the green heaven materialized dragon skill to block the corrosion by the desolate force. At the same time, vigorous devouring force erupted from his body without restraint and completely devoured those waves of desolate force invading his body, before condensing them in his dantian. Under the continuous influx of desolate force within his dantian, the grey mist started to condense faster. Gradually there were signs of the condensation taking shape within his dantian. While Lin Dong was trying his best to defend against the vast amount of desolate force trying to rush into his body, many gazes from the surroundings stayed unblinking on his body. All those gazes were filled with some degree of shock. They could see that the withering signs originally present on Lin Dong's body had actually began to gradually halt. Lin Dong actually managed to resist the frightening desolate force that was invading his body. The blind old man used his ashen grey eyes to stare at the youth beside the desolate stone. His tense body started to gradually relax. He could feel large quantities of desolate force continuously flowing from the desolate stone into Lin Dong's body. What made him feel quite shocked was that there was no uncomfortable expression on Lin Dong's face when handling the vast amount of desolate force. Within his body, it seems like there is something that is able to contend with the desolate force. The blind old man muttered to himself. Although he could not see, his other senses were extremely keen. From his other senses, he could vision that Lin Dong's thin body was akin to a bottomless pit. No matter how hard he tried to probe, he still could not fathom its depths. At this rate, it would take no more than half a day for him to condense a desolate seed. This rate is much faster than that fellow Ju Tong. If Chen Zhen or Wu Dao knew about this, they would probably be totally dumbfounded. It looks like another outstanding person has joined the desolate hall this time. Di? Lin Dong was obviously unable to sense the shocked gazes originating from his surroundings, as he was totally focused on the massive foreigner that was invading his body. As more and more desolate force invaded his body, Lin Dong could gradually feel that there was a mysterious type of fluctuation being emitted from within the enormous desolate stone. This sensation, Lin Dong had obviously felt before this kind of mysterious fluctuation before. He faintly frowned, however, without giving him much time to think, the fluctuation suddenly grew increasingly violent. Increasingly savage desolate force unexpectedly erupted forth and violently rushed towards him. The desolate force this time around was several times more violent than before. Furthermore, their offensive intention was extremely clear. It felt as if someone was controlling the desolate stone and launching an attack at him. Lin Dong suddenly opened his eyes. His eyes sparkled as he stared at that enormous desolate stone. He was a disciple of the desolate hall, and under normal circumstances, there should not be anyone that would create difficulties for him by manipulating the desolate stone. In that case, that attack should have been launched by the desolate stone itself. Soul treasure, huh? Lin Dong's gaze sparkled before he promptly took a deep breath of air while a shocked expression fluttered across his eyes. This desolate stone was actually a soul treasure. Furthermore, it was a soul treasure that had some degree of consciousness. Pure yuan treasure. Lin Dong tugged at the corners of his mouth. A soul treasure that was able to possess such frightening energy was absolutely something that any ordinary heavenly soul treasure could not compare with. Then, there was obviously only one possibility left. That means that the desolate stone was actually a pure yuan treasure, similar to the heavenly sealing array that those people from the West Xian region used. Raw? While Lin Dong was secretly feeling shocked by the status of the desolate stone in front of him, a murky grey light suddenly erupted from the surface of the desolate stone. The light started wriggling before congealing, lighting quick into a grey beam. It snaked on the surface of the stone like lighting, before attacking Lin Dong. Clang! The sudden move by the desolate stone immediately caused many startled whooshing sounds from the surroundings. Many disciples stood up on the platform and looked at this scene in shock. Obviously this was the first time over so many years that they had seen the desolate stone take the initiative to launch an attack. At the same time, Lin Dong obviously discovered the intention of the desolate stone as he immediately frowned. Immediately, he did not dare to underestimate it as boundless green light erupted from the heart of his palm. The green light rushed towards the grey light and viciously slammed against it. Bang! A low and deep impact sound resounded out from the surface of the desolate stone. A shocking quantity of energy fluctuations erupted out, causing all the surrounding air to be blasted away. HMPH. Lin Dong's body violently trembled a few times before a snorting noise came out of his throat. His finger, which was in contact with the desolate stone, turned numb. However, what truly frustrated him was that the desolate stone actually withdrew the desolate force. From its actions, it was as if it was unwilling to let Lin Dong absorb such a large quantity of desolate force. Lin Dong's gaze turned solemn. His desolate seed was about to take shape and he naturally wanted to complete it in a single try. If he was to give up now, it was obviously not going to be possible. With a thought, he spread open his palms and pressed all 5 fingers against the desolate stone. At every spot where his fingers touched the desolate stone, 5 streams of devouring force congealed in a black ray of light and directly shot straight into the desolate stone, before rapidly drilling into the deeper sections. Hum. Hum. When those black rays of light drilled into the desolate stone, the stone obviously felt what had happened. Immediately, wave after wave of incomparably violent desolate force surged forth and easily blocked Lin Dong's attack. He actually aroused the ire of the desolate stone, muttered the blind old man. A somewhat intrigued expression appeared on his face. This scene was almost identical to what happened to that fellow back then. Damn it! After sensing the rejection from the desolate stone, Lin Dong could not help but curse while clenching his teeth. If he was able to fully exhibit the power of the devouring ancestral symbol, he would not be afraid of the desolate stone. However, under the gazes of many people, he was unwilling to expose the secret within his body. The desolate stone obviously sensed the hopelessness and hesitation from Lin Dong. It immediately turned rampant and launched wave after wave of desolate force, which directly impacted and suppressed the 5 rays of black light back into Lin Dong's body. It then proceeded to flaunt its prowess to force Lin Dong to back away. Lin Dong frowned. He had obviously never expected that his all-out absorption of the desolate force would provoke such a violent reaction by the desolate stone. This put him in a dilemma. Lin Dong's fingers, which were in contact with the desolate stone, violently trembled as waves of repulsive force spread out from within the desolate stone. It was attempting to push his fingers off. Lin Dong's facial expression turned slightly ugly as glanced over at his fingers, which were being gradually repulsed by the desolate stone. Was he going to fall short of his goal in the end? If he was unable to condense a desolate seed, he would obviously be unable to practice the desolate martial arts. Kai? One by one, Lin Dong's fingers were shaken and repulsed by the desolate stone. Regardless of how hard he struggled, he was still unable to resist the repulsive energy coming from the desolate stone. He had finally experienced firsthand the frightening strength of a pure yuan treasure. Fuck you. When he saw his last finger being pushed off, Lin Dong grew angry and could not resist, resulting in a curse escaping from his mouth. At this moment, however, he suddenly felt something in his body starting to violently shake. Before he even realized what was happening, temperate white glow directly shot out of his last remaining finger and flew straight inside the desolate stone viciously. Kai? A faint penetration sound rang out from within the desolate stone as that temperate white glow directly slammed against layers of desolate force within the desolate stone. After which, it broke through countless layers with a speed akin to snapping bamboo. Kai 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 kai. Under the dumbfounded observation by Lin Dong, the temperate white glow pierced through all the defensive layers of the desolate stone within a short span of 10 seconds, before it finally reached the deepest part of the stone. At that moment, a peculiar fluctuation started to spread out. When this fluctuation appeared, Lin Dong was shocked to find out that the fluctuation within the depths of the desolate stone was actually beginning to tremble. Roar roar! While Lin Dong was still in shock, waves of extremely vigorous desolate force rushed out of the desolate stone akin to the bursting of flood waters. With a frightening speed, they rushing into the depths of Lin Dong's body before pouring into his dantian. Kai? Due to the arrival of the seemingly crazy amount of desolate force, the grey mist within the dantian started to condense. With a sudden tremble, it finally condensed into a fist-sized grey-colored bead. At this moment, Lin Dong had finally condensed a desolate seed. This video will end here.